Hey guys, so the way we're going to be doing these lecture presentations a little bit different than what we did the past couple weeks. I know I apologize for kind of the inconvenience of having to take a picture of your notes and all that good stuff. So this is going to be a little different. It's going to be in the form of an ed puzzle. So instead of filling out notes as you go, this way it's a lot quicker for me to grade. You'll be taking a quiz every day, basically, with the exception of a couple days on the topics of the day. So today we're going to start our unit on Sub-Saharan Africa. So it's everything below the Sahara Desert. Okay, as you can see from this map here, it's pretty simple. From the satellite view, you can see everything here in this tan brown is the Sahara Desert. So this red line, almost pretty much everything below that, right? Because we already talked about the North African countries, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Egypt. Those are part of our Middle East unit. So we're going to be talking about everything below those, okay? So getting right into it, and we'll just talk about the physical geography for this, and then each day, just like we're doing class, will be a different section. So today's physical geography, we're going to talk about the couple of the mountain ranges, rivers, lakes, so on and so forth. The Atlas Mountains we covered actually in our previous unit. They're kind of highlighted here. They're a major mountain range in Africa. The rest of Africa is not very mountainous, but there are, with the exception of a couple isolated mountains in Ethiopia, in eastern Ethiopia. All right, talk about some of the four great rivers in Africa. The Nile River, obviously the big one there, empties into the Mediterranean, the longest river in the world. The Niger River, that's pronounced Niger, it's a French term. The Zambezi River in kind of southeastern Africa. And the Congo River that flows mostly through the Congo. So as you're practicing your map, you will kind of get more familiar with more of these countries and where more of these landforms are. So those are your four major waterways in Africa. Okay. All right, we're going to talk about the Drakensberg Escarpment. Escarpment is a steep slope capped by a nearly flat plateau. Okay, so this is kind of a new concept that maybe we haven't touched on just yet. But by this time, you should be familiar with what the term plateau means. It's kind of a high, flat area. And as you can see here, it's a steep slope. So it's kind of usually around water. And in this case, it's capped by a nearly flat plateau. So escarpment. There are five major, what we call basins or depressions in Africa. These have been filled with sediment eroded from surrounding highlands over time. So if you ever hear, I'm trying to think if we've ever talked about any basins. We did our Canada unit. We talked about some different basins. But again, these are huge depressions that fill with sediment, erode over time. So we've got the El Jouf. Now remember, a lot of, you may not be familiar with this. We'll talk about this more tomorrow and in the coming days. But much of Africa was colonized by the French in the 18th and 19th century. So many people in Africa speak French. So a lot of the terminology you might see is going to be in French. So for example, here the El Jouf. This is the first one. It contains the inland delta of the Niger River. The Chad Basin. Chad is a country. Not Mr. Heifer. Chad Basin holds Lake Chad. The Sudan Basin, region of the swamps called the Sud, hence the name Sudan. The Congo Basin, and the Kalahari Basin in Botswana. So there's your Congo Basin. The Democratic Republic of the Congo is one of the largest nations in Africa. The Kalahari Basin, the Kalahari Desert down here in southern Africa. Flat area, lots of giraffes, kind of like savanna climate there. A rift is a long, deep valley with mountainous slopes and sides. Last year in 6th grade, you guys would have learned about rift valleys. And when you talked about continental drift, spreading apart of continental plates, right? So you got the Eastern Rift Valley in Eastern Africa and the Western Rift Valley in Western Africa. Climate. So this actually is something that we would have touched on earlier on in the year when we talked about latitude climates. So because Africa is so large, there are lots of different climate zones. So we range from a desert, what we call an arid climate up here in the north. In this red is the Sahara Desert, and then kind of below it you get different types of climates. And you've got rainforest type here, and then the Congo you've got savanna or steppe, kind of the grassland areas, and you've got some kind of intermediate climate zones here in the yellow, and we'll kind of look more at each one of those different ones here in a second. Okay, humid tropical. We talked about this. This is a mid-latitude climate. This would be a low-latitude climate. So this is more like your rainforest type climate. So obviously around the equator, the Congo River Basin, Gulf of Guinea, rain, a lot of rain, very humid, hence humid, wet, lots of lush vegetation, constant warm temperatures. Tropical savanna. Savanna is what you would see kind of like, for example, in The Lion King, kind of that flat grassland type terrain. Dry weather during the winter. There's two seasons. There's kind of the dry season, and then you got your wet season. Usually they are around, kind of bordering the rainforest, but not necessarily part of the humid tropical. So these are more of your again, it's called savanna. It's kind of an in-between a dry and a wet climate. Okay, a Sahel, bush savannas and grasslands. So these are more getting towards your arid areas here, where you see very little vegetation. As you can see, it's very dry here. Lots of drought is a problem, and we'll talk about more of the crises that Africa faces in the coming lessons. A desert climate, obviously the Sahara Desert and that Kalahari Desert there in South Africa. Okay, obviously the Sahara Desert is the largest. Extremely hot, extremely dry. It's very difficult to live there. That's why not many people do, with the exception of people living, like in Egypt around the Nile River. You got the Namib Desert, again in southern Africa. So your Namib and your Kalahari are in southern Africa. Again, the arid climate, maybe some bushes, brushes, different animal life, but not very many people live in these areas. Humid subtropical. Okay, so this, sorry about that, humid subtropical. This is kind of a step below humid tropical. So that humid tropical is like your rainforest. Humid subtropical is like a step below that. Created from rainstorms in the summer that move into South Africa from the Indian Ocean. So again, you have very warm summer and spring weather, but it's a little bit cooler in the fall and winter, in the winter season. Whereas in a rainforest or humid tropical, it's constantly warm year round. Marine West Coast, we got a little bit of that in Africa, just kind of down here towards the tip. This is what you'd see kind of like in Oregon and Washington, very mild, rainy, evergreen forests kind of climate. Not very common in Africa. Mostly what we would see would be desert or your humid subtropical, humid tropical. Little bit of Mediterranean, again on the tip. Mediterranean climate is what you'd see around the Mediterranean region. That would be mostly North Africa, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, where we see kind of pastoral, herding livestock, fruit, bushes kind of grow. So this is what you would see kind of similarly in Southern Europe. So that's mostly North Africa and as well as the very southern tip. Some natural physical challenges that Africa faces due to its physical, just the diversity of different physical regions and climates that it has is obviously drought. And on the opposite end of that spectrum, they do also face floods, like with the Nile River, volcanoes, earthquakes. There's a whole plethora of things going on that trouble Africa, just like really any other continent, though. The problem is that much of the land in Africa is not suitable for agriculture. The soil is dry, salty. Salt in the soil. If you learned last year when you talked about the Punic Wars, the Romans spread salt on the ground so that Carthage couldn't grow plants anymore. Salt is not good for growing crops. and they also face a lot of diseases: malaria, tuberculosis, AIDS, so on and so forth. And we'll talk about that more a little bit later. Okay, earthquakes, volcanoes, disease, so on and so forth. All right, that will wrap up our lesson for today.